Our tendency to ignore God in the midst of our conflict leaves a huge obstacle to finding peace. Because when we don't look to God to help us in our conflict, we're going to be relying on ourselves and our own knowledge and our own understanding, which is far more limited. One of the most valuable things that you can learn to do in a conflict is to learn how to be able to stop and ask yourself, how can I please and honor God in this situation? In the book of Corinthians, we see that the church was a mess. And Paul pointed out that they were only focused on themselves and they needed to be focused on God. 1 Corinthians 10:31 says, "Whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God." Glory is a Bible word for the essence of God. To live for the glory of God means you bring attention to, display, or reveal God's greatness. When you draw on God's grace to put off your self-centered attitudes and to act instead on His principles, you put His glory on display. Your best way to keep living for God is to constantly ask yourself questions that bring your focus back to God, such as, how can I please God in this situation? How can I point this person to Jesus? Or how can I bring praise to God by showing others how God is transforming my life? There are three main ways to glorify God in the midst of conflict. The first is to trust God. You can trust God rather than relying on yourself and your own strengths as we respond to people who oppose us. We can ask God to give us grace when we're trying to depend on Him and follow His ways, even when His ways don't line up with what we know and what we're comfortable with. The second thing that you can do is to obey God. If you want to honor Jesus and show that He is worthy to be loved more than anything else in the world, you have to learn His ways and obey His commands. This won't be without mistakes, but we can draw on God's power and on His grace to guide us as we learn. And if you don't know what God would want you to do in a situation, that's a perfect opportunity to go to God's Word and to dig into what He has told us. And we can go to fellow believers and ask for their advice and for their prayer. Finally, you can imitate God. Ephesians 5:2 says, "Be imitators of God, therefore as dearly loved children, and live a life of love, just as Christ loved us and gave Himself up for us as a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God." When we better mirror Jesus' humility and love and grace, forgiveness, we surprise the world and honor the Lord by showing His presence and power in our lives. Glorifying God brings Him praise and honor for showing who He is, what He is like, and what He is doing in you. Glorifying God benefits us as well, especially in conflict. When you're focused on a God-centered approach to conflict, you actually become less concerned with the results of the conflict. Even if a person is refusing to respond to your efforts to make peace, you can still find comfort in the fact that you're being obedient to God. One great way to honor God in conflict is by asking the question, is this worth fighting over? When the issues are big, the answer is yes. But when the issues are small, the answer should be no. Proverbs 19:11 says, "A man's wisdom gives him patience. It is to his glory to overlook an offense." It's important to remember these distinctions. Overlooking is an active choice. For those of us who want to escape conflict, overlooking is not the same thing as avoiding. And for those of us who want to attack conflict, overlooking is not a weak cop-out. Overlooking is a strong choice. It is powered by the strength of the gospel. And overlooking is a practical choice. Instead of calling each other out for every single offense, doing this creates an atmosphere of grace where we can let go of some of our hurts and move on with our lives. So, think and talk amongst yourselves. When have you overlooked an offense and experienced a good result? Remember that overlooking is not the right choice whenever the wrong is damaging your relationship with a person, hurting other people, hurting the offender, or significantly dishonoring God. Letting go or getting over it can look like a really bad way to approach conflict, but as a peacemaker, overlooking is often your fastest and least costly route to peace. In every conflict, we must ask ourselves, is this worth fighting over? So the first G that we talked about in this chapter is to glorify God. This is the foundation of everything else when approaching your conflict. And when the issue is too significant to simply overlook, the next 3 G's that we will talk about offer additional, indispensable steps for pursuing harmony in every part of your life.